situation where the group didn't necessarily meet the eligibility requirements. One example would be a school. But the program, like the dog studying program, was something that we wanted to support. And so we chose to support that. And so our question is, should eligibility focus on the nature of the activity rather than the nature of the organization?
Is there a way to consider both?
There is a way to consider both. I would recommend that we stick to one or the other. An example of if it was strictly focused on the nature of the activity, maybe if Co-op wanted to put on, I'm just throwing a name out there for a local business, but if Co-op, for example, wanted to put on a program that was free for all community members and accessible for everyone to come join in, you know, if we change the eligibility requirements to be based on the program itself and not the organization, they would be eligible to apply.
I think we need to stick to non-profit that benefit the community or groups within the community. But I don't know if we should be subsidizing a corporation, right?
Councillor Betty?
I'd like to see it, you know, with like what's happening itself, right? Not the organization, the event itself, right?
I think it should be focused on the activity as well, not necessarily, because any corporation could do some great activity for youth or any great initiative within our community, but because they're a corporation, they're not eligible. So I think it should be for the activity itself, or the event itself.
I'd just like to say one thing to kind of back Matt up on that. It's not like a corporation would come to us and ask for money anyways, likely, you know?
So
That's
Chemical
why I
comes
say
and
that.
asks for money for a bike rodeo, you're going to say yes?
Who?
Chemical?
Chemical?
Like for example,
Well, it depends on the circumstance.
if you get a school has a program, yes, they get funding through education, but that funding doesn't necessarily cover that type of programming. So
Exactly.
if you focus on what's being presented, the event that's being presented, as opposed to dwelling on who's.
I think like towards the end of the day when the program is running or the event is running, focuses on the event and not always who's running it.
Yeah.
And that's what we're asking if we'd like to capture here.
So I can think of one really good example of a newly formed group in town. They're not a nonprofit, but they're an arts collective. And they have a desire to run galleries and pop-up shows and all sorts of fun things, but they're not going to incorporate, they're not going to become a nonprofit. They are a collective. They're simple. There are a few people that want to do fun and creative things in town. So that's a group currently ineligible, except we fly in the face of our own policy all the time with this stuff, hence the school funding. So
School's important.
yes, but it's fully funded by the provincial government, right?
Extracurricular isn't.
And so opening it up to more of the activity might give us some better criteria, but I think we should keep it focused. Like if you were to switch it, because I see Councillor Vetri and Clausen are both fine with focusing on the activity. I think I would be too, but within specific criteria, such as being free to attend, fully free to attend, and criteria along those lines, which make sure the accessibility is there, because funding activities that aren't fully free for community members to attend makes me really uncomfortable. So
one of the things, reason why we're bringing this forward, obviously, is we've seen council want to do things and feel constrained by their policy. So we're looking just to help you with that. It's not that there's no judgment at this side of the table about wanting to do it. We want to make your policy work for you. I think there's two issues. One is eligibility. Of course, opening it up based on the nature of the event might help you, but then that doesn't mean that you can't consider those things when you're deciding how much money to give. Those are two different issues. So if you're like, well, maybe a business has more access to partnerships, or this is a smaller group, or they're doing more activities local or not local, or whatever other factors you want to consider and how much is separate from the eligibility question, which
It would still come to this table for consideration.
I've got to disagree with your point, Abby, about being completely free for everyone to attend, because there's some initiatives that could be out there where maybe it's just to help to get that price down to.
Oh, no,
for
no, no, sorry,
affordability.
free access, that anybody could, attend, it's not excluding,
Oh,
attendance if you pay or
Admission.
not pay or whatever, yeah, like,
can't
like
say
I
that.
can't ride the sled dog, I can't
Yeah,
do,
I mean,
I can't
subsidize the
participate in
entry
that.
fee or whatever.
Yeah.
But again, to that
Whereas-
point, if a group came forward and said, we would like a contribution and in exchange we're gonna make this free.
Yeah.
You might consider that in
Yeah.
your how much you wanna give, as opposed to if they came forward and said, well, if you give us $1,000, we're still gonna charge everyone $50 to participate. So you could consider that in your give.
I think that it would be an interesting amendment to consider.
I think if we focus on the activity as opposed to who's bringing it up, I think we can cover off a broader base of applications that way without, saying, well, our policy says this, we gotta exclude that event. So I think if we just focus on the activity, I think we'll get it.
I would assume that a change of that nature may result in a larger pool of applicants, which could be a good thing, to really have more choice for the types of programs that council wants to support.
Perfect.
The next question that we have is referring to the intake deadlines that we have, and so the last time the policy was updated, those intake deadlines changed. Currently, they're January 1st and July 1st. What I've heard is that really any fixed deadlines can be limiting, and so we could go a number of routes here. You could consider increasing the amount of intakes per year, to 3 or 4, or we could consider going with just an open intake throughout the year until the money is spent. What I've heard so far is there's a couple of groups that are looking to organize events coming up, being Children's Festival and the Pride Committee. Both of those events would happen before or on July 1st, and our upcoming intake is July 1st. And so at this point, the way that the policy is, those groups looking to run their events then would be asking for funding after their program event is finished and would not be eligible.
Or 6 months
Counselor
before,
Bentley.
when they know what's coming up.
That's
And the struggle, to your point, is that if they don't have that plan set 6 months in advance and someone who's committed to applying to this grant, then they may have missed the boat. And in this case, the way that the policy stands, those groups may have missed the boat, so to speak.
Okay, Councilor Berry, and then Councilor O'Shea.
Yeah, I'd like to, because we do have $42,000 a year in place right now. I'd like to see it just open throughout the year so somebody can come in and access it and request for it. To have different, intakes. I really don't understand that part of it, why we have to have it at different times. So just having it open throughout the year for people to come in, and we can either choose to deny or, approve.
Okay, Councilor O'Shea, and then Councilor Root.
Are there, so I'm assuming that you've spoken to a lot of groups that have said, I wanted to apply, or this doesn't work for me, or I'm also going to make the assumption that you've maybe asked them what would work for them. Based on any feedback that you've gotten, how would you suggest we achieve the greatest impact to be able to reach the widest, most diverse group, to be able to, distribute the money in the community? And, would it continue to serve the applicants we've seen so far, or would it get a whole different group of applicants coming in, do you think?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would assume that it would continue to serve the applicants that we see on a regular basis, but not having fixed intake deadlines increases the flexibility for the applicants, and I would expect to see more applicants because of that.
Councilor Root.
Right, so I would be okay with increasing the intakes, be it quarterly, be it open, but my only concern is, I don't think we should go through a first come, first serve, because we're going to exhaust the funds quickly, and if we do that, we need to have a cap on how, the amount that people can access, right? Because we can go, one group could request the full 40,000, then what do we do, right? We're hooped. So we need to put into policy to a maximum of, right?
Yeah, but we can just decline them, Vivian, and say, no, you're only gonna get 2,000, that's the choice.
Yeah, I know, but based on what, right? We'd have to have parameters or some sort of rubric that each grant proposal would have to meet in order to make that definition, instead of just throwing numbers in the air, right? So I think we need to, if we increase the intakes to whatever, we should maybe look at what is the maximum amount you can apply for.
Okay, Councillor Hunt, and then we'll go back
Well,
to.
I agree with Ryan on this conflict material. I think if we open it up and had some common sense, I don't think anybody at this table is gonna give away 40,000 the first person that applies. And I think that several new agencies like the art people might be ready to apply now. And if they're, like, the festivals in July, like Connor was saying, there's no slot for them to apply. So if we open it up and kept it, you know, calm, when we're a lot of money, you know.
I guess however we do it, it's gonna be based on council meetings as well, like, do we do it, you know, do we approve applicants every second meeting of the month, or if we have it ongoing, because we're not gonna do it every meeting, you know, so either we increase the intakes to maybe every second month, or do it monthly, you know, and then we'll.
It's up to council. I mean, we certainly can. It's not challenging to put together a quick report that says, this is the community grant policy. You've approved 42,000. There's 36,000 remaining in the fund. This applicant qualifies. They're asking for $3,000. What would you like to give them? We have 2 months left in the season, or whatever the issue is. So we can definitely do it on a case-by-case basis, but it's 100% up to council on what they feel is going to serve the community best.
Councillor,
If the distance between intakes, Connor, as you're saying, is too far apart, and it's kind of knocking a few people out of the ring per se, I'd be fine with upping that intake to quarterly. But I think having an intake deadline is important so that you can have a list. Okay, we have 10 applicants here instead of 1 at a time or 2 at a time. We have 10 here, so we can gauge. Okay, well, maybe this group we can give this much, this group we can give this much to, instead of some being left totally out.
And maybe if they don't get their first one, they can apply to the next one if they have enough time, and therefore be considered, or increase the value of their application to us.
When you're trying to decide a budget, you don't just look at one thing, you look at everything.
Yeah.
And sometimes you gotta trim a little bit to make everything fit.
I think you lose the spirit of competition. You know, like, it gives us something to compare to and say, okay, what's going to do the best, the most, what's going to provide the most bang for the buck. And so if you go too close together with your intakes, so you go quarterly, or I think it might give you a number to a better grouping.
One of the most common questions I get when speaking to groups about this grant policy that we have is, how much money am I eligible for? How much should I ask for? And currently the policy doesn't state a maximum amount, which really leads into the next question. Should groups be required to fund a portion of their project, or do we want to put a maximum amount that each group can apply for? It is a challenge when groups don't know what their cap is. But when we're applying for grants, typically there's a maximum amount that we know we can go for. And so it's confusing to groups sometimes when they don't know that right out of the gate.
And I think you're also probably seeing a little bit of it, but without a cap, you get scope creep. So this year we asked for 5, we got 5. Next year we asked for 6, we got 6. Now we're asking for 8. And people just keep upping the ante, so it's a bit of a challenge.
So is there a way to say, okay, well, maybe the cap is, we don't give anybody more than 5, but out of that 5, it can't be 100% of your funding to do that project. It's got to be 50, no more than 50% of putting that program on. Is that something?
Like the recommendation here.
Yeah, you could do a maximum
That's
and then
item
up
3.
to, so whichever is less essentially is what you could apply for.
I would agree with that.
Not a bad idea.
And that's why I was saying, put a parameter in, right? So that people know how much to apply for, so we don't get crazy requests, we get reasonable requests. I do feel that a group should be able to ask for 100% funding for their project, and then we can decide if we are able to provide 100%. Because some groups might not have the capacity to generate revenue.
Yeah, no, you're right.
Okay, any other comments? Okay, Councillor Sharp.
I'm thinking like the number 3 question for me. I'm not really like having a percentage covered. For smaller organizations, smaller groups, little collectives, little events, I think there shouldn't be a certain percentage covered by that group, because it can just be a one-time thing, a nice little thing, and they're just trying to do an ad hoc whatever. So like over a certain amount, yes, I think if you've got a $10,000 project, you should be able to raise some of those funds elsewhere. So the numbers that I was thinking is maybe under $3,000, you don't have to contribute, but if it's over, you must fund at least a third of your request, or something along those lines, because that creates a bit of accessibility. We have to, they can raise a third of their funding needed already. We can see that, we can contribute to, you know, another third or what have you, and it just puts a little bit of skin in the game for them. If it's a bigger event, if it's under $3,000, then that's something.
I think something like that makes sense.
Yeah, we can certainly lay that out and bring it back to council for review. The fourth point here is that right now in the grant policy there's a fixed amount that every year we're going to offer $42,000. We're recommending that we remove a reference to a dollar amount in there, and rather reference that the amount approved by council during the annual budget deliberations. That would give some flexibility based on a number of factors, if it was going to be higher or lower based on that year.
That sounds reasonable.
It's a great.
Yeah, and it doesn't tie us to something, right?
Okay. Fifth point here is that we've been talking about dollar amounts, and usually groups are asking for dollars from us rather than in-kind support, but it's often a blend. What we're seeing is sometimes that in-kind support can be lost along the way, but it's important to note that there is a value or dollar amount that goes into that in-kind support, whether it's equipment or just staff time or resources, whatever it may be. And so what we would hope to capture is what is the dollar amount for that in-kind support, and include that as part of the application. And so if a group is asking for $6,000, snow removal, and that's going to cost $600 for Public Works to remove the snow for a specific reason, those funds, the $600 of in-kind support, would be granted to the group and then would be billed back to the department. And so that department sees that revenue based on the work that they put in to support that event.
Good
Should
practice.
all be accounted for.
Like
Yeah, we
typically,
should already
I would
be
say
doing that.
typically, it would come from the community services department,
Mhm.
but often it is Public Works or the fire department that are supporting events, and it's just important to track that.
Okay.
It's great.
Yeah, it makes sense.
Okay.
I
Thank
would
you.
agree.
Do you have any other questions or comments regarding the policy that we have currently, or any other changes that we haven't kind of earmarked here for discussion that you think we should talk about tonight?
You've done a great job bringing some really critical things, and I think whatever suggestions to policy you make are going to be
No,
good.
I think your questions really drew out what needed to be discussed. So it's great.
So will you be bringing a revised policy next
That's
meeting?
right.
Okay, awesome, thank you. Thank you for that.
Okay, our next item on the agenda is the charter.
So
Center project charter.
Yeah, the project charter for a new recreation center, and so we've had numerous discussions about what the future of Melhaven Uniplex looks like, and whether or not we're looking to renovate that building or to rebuild a new one. we've put together a project charter here for you to look through. And at this point, we're looking for your support to move forward with the project as it is, but I want to be really clear tonight that everything on this project charter is still open for discussion, and so if we want to change anything on it, that's, it's a good time tonight, because we will be taking the next steps through this project charter if this is approved tonight. And so if you have any questions about it specifically, now is a good time to ask.
I think before we proceed any further with any of the recreation center stuff, that we really should engage our neighboring communities too, and see what sort of stake they're willing to put into this, and have their input. Maybe they want to have some input in the planning, if they're going to be at the table with it. It's not a facility that's just going to serve the town of Orange. It's serving the entire region and beyond the tri-community, the Northern Administrative District as well. So I think before we proceed any further with it, we should invite those neighbors for a bit of a discussion on what they see their piece being.
We need to be chasing some money here too. I mean, I think it's fine and dandy what we've got written down here, but as the mining companies and, do we have anybody representing the town of LaRange going to talking to them and getting $30 million or 15 million or 5 million, or we just?
That's a big part of where I was going with that too, Councillor Hunt, is if we're gonna put together a plan and then go to Air Orange and LaRange Indian Band and said, hey, do you wanna have a part of this? Well, that conversation's probably not gonna go very well. But if we have them at the table first, then maybe we can see where we stand.
Well, I guess, yeah, go ahead.
A question I have about that is if there was support from the neighbors, would that change the scope of the project? If there was input from neighboring communities, would we be looking at building a bigger facility or a facility with more amenities?
I think it definitely would, or potentially the location of it, or depending what those other communities would like to bring to the table and what their level of involvement would be. I think it would be an important discussion to have with those neighbors.
One of our intents was to, although it has a map there of the funding allocation, of course, we'd be trying to reduce our contribution as much as possible. So certainly we can add a regional consultation phase to this project, which would address that.
I think this is part of doing our homework and really, because right now until we put it out for our RFP, we really don't know what that price is going to come in, and to go to the tri-community and say, well, we're not sure what it's going to be, but at least if we go through part of this process and get to that point, and we can let them know that we're taking that step, and give an opportunity to respond.
I think that the town has done a good job with the consultation pieces we've done recently with recreation and parks. We're open to participation regionally, but I think if, as the councilor has mentioned, we haven't engaged the political level yet to see what their appetite is for being involved on scope and or financial, so we certainly will look at that and bring it back with a revision.
I'd like to make a motion that council proceed with option A to approve the recreation project charter as presented.
Just a point of
We'll
clarify.
We'll have to make those motions after we're.
Yeah, two things. So yeah,
Committee
so
of
that
the
one,
whole.
and then what I recommend based on what I'm hearing is that administration will draft an amendment. We'll bring it back to next meeting just to incorporate the feedback we hear today, because making a few little tweaks that we'd like to make. So and then we don't need a motion. We'll just take the feedback back.
I'll just go on the record to say that I'm opposed to it as presented.
Good. Okay, we'll move on to 5.4 and the Lake Shore use and development policy.
Is this going for it?
Thank you, Your Worship. Really the purpose in bringing forward this report is to create awareness about the town's shoreline use and development policy and make you aware of the fact that staff will be bringing forward requests related to the sale and lease of public shoreline lands. And to get thoughts from the committee about what they think about how we treat requests to sell public waterfront lands. That's really the primary focus. So otherwise, our shoreline policy is really quite effective for staff in terms of dealing with those types of requests. So staff are dealing with trespass situations involving town lands and are working with property owners to resolve them. Now, this may include cases where people would like to pursue purchase or lease of town lands, or alternatively may be required to remove the trespass altogether. As a satisfactory solution is not always available. As such, staff wish to revisit with council its shoreline use and development policy to ensure that it best reflects the will of council in moving forward on the treatment of the town shoreline lands and use it to guide administration in dealing with the public on these matters. In particular is the issue of the sale of shoreline lands, and questions 1, 2, and 4 as outlined in the report really relate to this topic. The current shoreline policy encourages the preservation of shoreline lands for public use, but that they can be sold where a defensible case can be made that the land is not a valuable part of the public inventory. This can often be difficult to determine, particularly without present and clear plans and direction that have yet to define future needs in relation to such a significant asset, and therefore opens the door to ambiguity. In addition to access and public enjoyment, the protection of shoreline lands contributes to the aesthetic quality of the community, serves an important environmental role for aquatic habitat, and to control things like drainage, erosion, and pollution, and provides an opportunity for installation of future public infrastructure designed not only to provide elevated levels of public amenity, but that can also be deployed in the case of future environmental changes due to things like climate change that affect water levels and the like. So in order to avoid less informed decision making in deciding to dispose of these lands or these requests in future, administration would like to explore with the committee a change to the shoreline policy that would see the policy worded such that the sale of shoreline lands would only be considered in situations where council determines that an exchange or sale of shoreline land would result in a net increase to the overall public benefit, at least as best as council can determine at any given time. Policy does include provisions for leasing arrangements, which administration can use as a last drastic means of dealing with trespass issues, and at the same time facilitate objectives designed to protect public shoreline lands for current and future use. It is noted that a leasing arrangement will not always be a suitable solution in situations where the scope of an adjacent landowner's desires for the use of shoreline land outweighs the ability to protect it. Leases can be crafted to ensure that the use and development of shoreline lands is strictly controlled, public access is maintained, and where circumstances change such that the public land is needed to implement new projects that cater to the public interest, leases can be discontinued accordingly. So I just wanted to create some awareness about the policy. Obviously, being a newcomer here, it's new to me, and we've got several existing outstanding files that need to be dealt with in terms of requests for the sale and lease of public land. So I just wanted to bring this forward front and center to, how to resolve, make sure we're all on the same page in terms of what policy we're going to follow and what our expectations are dealing with the public and moving forward.
Councillor Goodry?
Thank you, Lyle, for bringing this forward. It was actually kind of frustrating
That's
reading.
Jeff.
Jeff. Frustrating reading because we've been dealing with this since we first started in council, and I don't understand why we're still having to deal with it. I know my idea of land encroachment hasn't changed. It's not right. They were done by handshakes and deals back in the day, and we need to get this straightened out. Right? None of us are allowed to take our property and move it onto somebody else's property or to extend back into the bush. Like, I live on Lawton, I could extend back into the bush, and that is not right. So I agree. I do like the idea of leasing property instead of selling. I think that's a beautiful way of looking at it. And then if there was anything, you know, like let's say they started changing the shoreline, stuff like that, we could take that lease back and say, no, you did not ask if you could do that, and now you're going to be penalized for it, right? So thank you for putting the work into this, and I hope we can finalize this tonight and get it done.
Councillor Lee?
So I would not support anyone purchasing or leasing shoreline. We've had this discussion at this table before. Nobody owns the shoreline, and we need to respect that. And if we look at the land and who it really belongs to, does it really belong to any of us, or are we all living on borrowed / possibly stolen land, right? So I would absolutely say no to purchasing shoreline, nor and to leasing it. That would be my stance.
Councillor Clausen?
I don't know if there's a way to draft a policy that encompasses all of this. I think there's so many different situations on that shoreline. There's not one fix for anything. There's some areas where there is a municipal reserve in front of, say, a residential area. And then even with that same residential area, leasing the shoreline itself or the waterfront and having access to the lake. Is there really any business of anybody else to be going through there? Probably not. But that being said, there are locations where there's a piece of municipal reserve in front of a property, and it does make sense that the public should be able to get there. There's not a one-size-fits-all solution for any of this. There's so many different scenarios down there.
Councillor Bashar?
Yeah, this one is a loaded
Keep it to
set
10 minutes.
set of questions. I know, I will.
Or
I
five.
actually organized my thoughts around this one because there's a lot going on in here, and as a planner, brain logic says municipal land is municipal land, da, da, da. But, and I was sitting in Jeff's seat a few years ago and worked with Councillor McPhail and Councillor Clausen and developed the shoreline use policy based on what the council at the time was saying, because they were looking at, like, we did a full analysis of ownership and encroachment and leases, we restructured leases, all of these things to try and build towards that regaining of the shoreline. But there is a really important need to understand the existing, like, first off, I'm going to recognize there is existing case law, does not grant squatters' rights on municipal reserve, on shoreline lands. But we have to take into consideration the existing context, the historic construction of buildings and homes on the waterfront, the permitting and the bigger picture. Like, it has nothing to do with grandfathering, I hate that word, but it's looking at the impact on achieving our goals. So how our town was built 40 years ago, I quickly realized when I was doing a lot of the land analysis, it looks a lot different now with the change in lake levels. So somebody that used to have 40 feet or 50 feet of municipal reserve between their lot line and the shoreline is now 20 feet. Is it reasonable or fair to reclaim, not reclaim, but to change the use of that municipal reserve parcel, which affects the adjacent property owner that pays, you know, like downtown shoreline commercial taxes are pretty high from what I understand, just like in our industrial area and the contribution that they make. I can think of, is it 3 current properties that are we're dealing with encroachments on shoreline municipal reserve?
Well, provided I have all the information, and there's at least 4.
Okay, there's 4.
Yeah.
And each one of those has their own set of factors that make each one unique, right? Like, I don't believe that we should sell existing dedicated lands that are below the flood hazard level. That's probably going to get deeper too. It's going to creep up, and it might start encompassing people's private property at a certain point if we don't have good control of the lake levels. it doesn't necessarily change how aggressive we should be in developing it, without taking a moment to actually ask what value that land holds for the public good. The understanding the criteria of what determines the overall benefit, the net benefit to the community, I think is really important. And where there is opportunity, like in our downtown plan, there's a bunch of arbitrary lines drawn through private property at this point for a continuous trail. We haven't actually taken the time to say, well, these lands here, the old Transwest water base, that's all private to the shoreline. Oh, the Anglican Church, that's private to the shoreline. Have we considered how we're going about to acquire those lands? Are we ever in hope of acquiring those lands? If not, let's talk about the alternatives that we can put in place to hang on to the lands we have, continue to lease them or whatever, come up with a reasonable agreement in that place, but to plan around and actually develop plans that make sense and are achievable and implementable in the current context, with the goals to grow and to adapt as we maybe are able to acquire more shoreline lands.
We're talking about encroachments though right now, not development.
Encroachments?
Encroachments. Right now, we're not talking about making trails through properties.
But we are. It's the same. It's the same conversation.
That'll be a discussion for another day, but right now, I guess what we're looking at is, we have a policy that's drafted, are we in agreement with it? And if we are, then we shouldn't be expected to sit here and listen to people that wanna negotiate sales or whatever. That should be, our administration team should be able to take that policy and work with that and make, and settle the differences with whoever's out there.
And just as a point of order, that was answering my statements there. We're all answering 1 through 4 of Jeff's questions on his report.
Yeah, and really this policy, you know, it affects a whole variety of situations, you know, whether they be encroachments, and like Councilor Bashir was pointing out, you know, we put on a community plan map, this is where we'd like our future trails to be and our future parks. That can be all set aside from the fact of whether the lands are private or not. Obviously, you got to strategize in terms of how you're going to acquire those lands, whether it be through a development process, or you're going to work with the owner to acquire a right of way, or you're going to pursue, I always forget the term.
Expropriation.
Thank you, sir. Expropriation, whatever it may be. I mean, sure, you know, this is one of the things the Downtown Revitalization Committee is talking about, is having a continuous trail network that takes advantage of the waterfront that doesn't exist now, and there are some hiccups to making that happen, but you don't have that long-term vision and, you know, stick by your guns in terms of allowing it to happen. Obviously, somebody had that vision back in the 70s when a lot of these subdivisions were approved and these reserves were put in place. But one thing, you know, I'm actually dealing with one specific request right now related to the sale of the land, and it doesn't seem that the lease would be a satisfactory result for that particular case. And so what I did was not only talk at length to the individual in question, but looked at our policy and had discussions with provincial staff. This exercise has actually been quite effective for me in terms of acquiring a good understanding of how the public reserve system works in Saskatchewan as a newcomer in this province. And what I can share with you is, you know, when we are looking at taking lands out of a public reserve, whether they be a municipal reserve, environmental reserve, what have you, that has to go to the minister for approval. So when I think about the fact that a lot of the reserves along our waterfront are included in municipal reserves, if you know, council is of the opinion that it would like to sell some lands and we need to adopt one of those bylaws and send it off to the province for approval, as Councilor Bashir was already pointing out, you know, if those lands are below the floodplain, the province is not going to approve it. They're going to want that to remain an environmental reserve, which is once again going to be vested back in ourselves, and really at the end of the day, you're no further ahead. So why are you going to put yourself through such a horrendous process just to come back with an answer that doesn't work for anybody? So, you know, I don't think we have to solve anything here tonight. I really wanted to get people thinking about it, and over the coming weeks, you'll be seeing reports coming from myself dealing with particular situations, and as people have already pointed out, there are individual circumstances. Every circumstance is different. It's no different from one form of development in the land use planning field than another. There's always different circumstances. The key is just sorting it all out and making sense of it and doing what you think is best in accordance with your policy. My focus here was really about the sale, because I'm a little concerned on that end of things. Once you start the domino effect and you set precedents, you really are creating issues, and that already exists to some extent or other, because it's always a case of, well, they got to do it, why can't I do it? And so you really have to be careful about how you administer and allow people to do things. And at the end of the day, we all have to remember that this is public land. You know, whether you actually utilize it for some intended purpose in future or not, which you may not know at the present moment, that remains to be seen. So thanks for taking the time to look through the report and providing us your feedback.
Just 2 quick points in the policy itself when I was reviewing it and based on the questions. On 7.1 in the policy for the purchase, sale, lease, and development, contextually, that was referring to those potential few cases that aren't really straightforward. And 7.2 was to kind of temper that, yeah, we want to own it all and run a boardwalk, but let's consider the realistic timeline was kind of the narrative that ran behind that, because it's realistically, we have to understand what our short-term, mid-term, and long-term goals are there. When it comes to like 7.6 of the policy, that was actually dealing with, I think, the year-to-year leases and the automatic renewals, if I remember correctly. And it's so that the town retains control and the ability to prevent alteration, though I'll point out the town's pretty poor record on dealing with municipal reserve parcels being graded and leveled with fill used as private parking lots and permanent structures being ignored and developed on the sites. So,
and hence my question about enforcement.
yeah, and that's the thing, is I think that that's important, and the severity, like having fill brought in on the shoreline is a severe infraction, and yeah, I'll just leave it at that.
Grounds for loss of the lease.
Just one last point, if I may, Your Worship. So at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what staff tell the folks that might come in to see us about, you know, these types of requests or possibilities. Ultimately, it's the council's decision, and they have a right to have that request considered by the council. It's just how staff makes its recommendation based on a review of the facts in the context of the policy at hand that will drive things. Ultimately, it's up to you, and you can make a political choice as to how those things go. I just want to make it as an effective process as possible, so we're telling the people how we believe our council's going to treat these things in accordance with the policy. So thank you.
Okay, thanks for that. Okay, motion to rise and report.
I move to rise and report.
Second.
Okay, so there, Councilor Clausen, all in favor?
Aye.
Motion carried. I don't think we have any motions coming out of it. I think we're gonna get some further reporting on some of the items. Okay, we'll move to bylaws. Bylaw number 673/23.
Your Worship, this item is just coming forward essentially to get the new bylaw on the books. We'll still give some time for some feedback that we're getting from various stakeholders and staff review, but it's a good representation of what we've talked about to date, so we're just asking that council consider first reading.
Okay, I move to proceed with option A, to give the first reading to the animal control bylaw 673/23.
I'll second.
Seconded by Councilor Bashar. Any discussion?
Just out of curiosity, who are the main stakeholders that have been consulted or are reviewing this?
Well, NAR is probably the primary one because they're a partner in
Yeah.
enforcement and care of animals in the community. We've also talked internally with bylaw department in terms of their feedback. I've sent it out to the doctor was involved with the study regionally for any feedback or input. I've also sent out a list of questions about her findings just to get some more context about those.
Yeah.
And then if there's something that we feel is worth incorporating. But some of these recommendations even align with that report. For example, some of the socioeconomic issues, like we're going to a free lifetime license because we want to encourage that and return animals to the proper owner and not be an impediment to licensing with the
Yeah.
financial implication. So things like that are kind of reflective in the policy that we've drafted.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, all in favor of the motion?
Aye.
Motion carried. Okay, okay, we'll move to business. We have the financial reports. Everybody has a chance to review those.
I'll move to approve the financial reports.
Moved by Councillor Clausen,
Second.
by Councillor Hunt. All in favor?
Aye.
Motion carried.
Move to accept bylaw building and development permit report.
I'll second.
Moved by Councillor Benry. All in favor? Motion
Aye.
carried.
Aye.
Okay, we wanna deal with the, approving the, report at this time, or
Should we wait until the
Let's
edits
just
are
do
done?
a final copy.
edited report before?
You
Yes.
can bring it back, that's fine.
Yeah, let's bring that one back.
Okay, so we'll have a motion to go into camera.
Also move.
I'll second.
Okay.
And motion for recess.